Well, welcome back, everybody, to Two Pastors and a Mic. My name is Shannick.
And I'm Corey.
And as always, we're so thankful that you're joining us today. We really appreciate you listening or watching. Those of you on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us as well. And, I love getting like reviews. I love getting comments, but I really love seeing the posts people make on YouTube after they have watched and chime in with different things. So those of you on YouTube, thank you so much.
Seriously.
But if you're listening, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or whatever platform it is, we would love it if you would subscribe, like this post, share this episode, and leave a review if you haven't already. That really, really encourages. I know last week we read one of the reviews.
We had several reviews last week, so thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Put us over 100 reviews for this show, and we're just so thankful to be able to just continue to do this and actually have people that listen. So it really does encourage us. I come in every week. We a lot of times record these on a Monday, even though you're listening on a Wednesday, and you know how Mondays go so far in your life, like how they've been. And sometimes I come in and I'm like, well, I don't really know if I really want to record a podcast today. But the fact that you continue to listen and reach out and engage with us, it really helps us continue to do what we do. So thank you so much. So let's just get into the episode with the question of the week. It is Super Bowl week.
Super Bowl Sunday.
Super Bowl's happening
boycotting
this Sunday. You're boycotting because you're Lions. Yeah, in grief. That's okay. We understand. And if you listened last week, you understand why. But it is a matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. So the question of the week is, what is your prediction?
My prediction is they both tie 0-0 and no one wins. Lord willing. No, honestly, screw the game. The Super Bowl Sunday I was telling Julie this the other day, and she's like, you are a loser. And I'm like, I'm okay. It is my favorite day, or at least top 3 favorite days of the year. It's my Christmas because you go to a party, and I've been going to the same party since 2013. You get a plethora of food options, which amazing. You get to watch the game, the entertainment at halftime, the Super Bowl commercials, just with a ton of people. Yeah. Some of these people I only see on Super Bowl Sunday. So it's kind of like, hey, reunion, what's up?
Yeah.
And it's just a ton of fun. So I don't really even care about the game this year. I hope it's a good one. I don't care, so I have no predictions. I'm just so disappointed because the place I've gone since 2013 is not doing it. Shout out to Tracy. We love you. If you're even listening to this or related to Tracy, you can give her a little text telling her that I was sending her a whole lot of hate over our podcast episode. No, I'm just kidding. I'm bummed. I'm sad. Yeah. They're great hosts.
Amazing hosts.
Since I've lived in Southern Indiana, I've only had a Super Bowl there. So now I'm like, where am I going to go?
What are we going to do? I'm in the same boat. I don't know what we're going to do now this week. I will say I usually root for the underdog. The Kansas City Chiefs, this is their 4th Super Bowl in 5 years. They've won it 2 times.
I think so.
So just with that in mind, I want to pull for the 49ers, but there's just something about those West Coast teams. Like I'd rather root for the Midwestern teams, and I'm not a Swiftie, and I really don't care about this relationship.
I do. I love it. I'm here for it.
I'm actually here for it. And I love that a lot of new people are engaging with the sport. A lot of new fans to the NFL. They're following only because of Taylor Swift. And I am not a hater. I actually really like it.
I love it. My daughter's involved. She's like, I can't wait for the Super Bowl. I'm like,
just to get the little screenshots
Swiftie.
of the 5-second, pan shots to Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
I actually love that too. And I think it's great. Great for the NFL. And I have been a Travis Kelce fan for at least 5 or 6 years.
Shout out to fantasy football.
Yeah, because of fantasy football. And so
we are losers.
So I know we are. So I'm going to pull for the Chiefs.
Did you see the statistic that revenue for Kansas City merchandise has been over $300 million since Taylor Swift announced their relationship with Travis Kelce?
Yeah, it's
crazy.
Insane. But I also think it's the NFL, not just Kansas City. It was the NFL revenue has increased by over 317 or 322 million with her involvement for the NFL as a whole.
How can you not love it?
Yeah,
I just love it.
It's great. So my heart, I'm pulling for Kansas City. My prediction though is the 49ers got a great team. I think they're going to win.
They do.
All right. Well, let's just stop talking football. Most of the people that listen to this podcast do not care at all.
I hate football. And to our European brothers, American football. Sorry for offending all of our friends over in Europe, which will be there very soon. And by very soon, I mean several months. So looking forward to that.
Later this year in November. And we're super excited to be there with all of our friends. They're in Holland and the Netherlands. So let's jump in. So we're continuing the series, navigating minefields, and talking about mental fitness, talking about emotional health, talking about our thought life, and making sure that we conquer our thoughts. And I love what you say a lot when it comes to our thoughts, that sometimes you can't control the thoughts you have, but you can control what you do with those thoughts. And I think today is no different, because what we're going to be talking about in today's episode is this idea of shame, and specifically the shame of should be. And I know a lot of people that I know, even myself at times, have went through seasons where we do experience a lot of shame. And we'll talk about this a little bit, like shame of maybe some things we've done, and we shouldn't have done those things. But more so, we're going to start off this episode talking about the idea of this shame of I should be whatever it is, and I maybe didn't meet my potential, or I had different expectations. And so this idea of this removal of shame, which what we should be in, is really we're going to talk about removing maybe other people's expectations of what I should be, removing the lies that I should be whatever that is, or I should be doing XYZ, removing the shame from things we should have done this year and accomplished, removing the shame of not even dreaming anymore because of disappointments, and also removing the pressure by addressing our shame. So it's this removal process that we're going to talk about today. We don't just want to give you insight into shame without also helping you remove some of that shame, because we do want you to live the full abundant life that Jesus has for you. And a part of that is going through the process of removing that shame from our life. And I love what the writer of Hebrews says, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. He says, "Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of faith." Like, he's a part of writing our story. And I love that. And it says, "For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of God." And so I wanted to share that because we want you to know that you're not alone in this journey. You're not alone in this tough process of, one, identifying the shame, recognizing the shame, and then going through the process of removal. It's not an instantaneous thing. It's a process that you go through. And we want to be here to help you in that journey of removing that from your life.
Yeah. And if Jesus scorned shame, there shouldn't be shame in your life. And again, this is the human process. You have the power because of Jesus to scorn your own shame. And I know that this is such a heavy topic, especially in the counseling world, because shame is one of those things that is internal because of circumstances. Again, people have abused many of us, and you live with that shame, or also the things that we never accomplished, and you live with that shame. And so shame comes in all kinds of different aspects and perspectives and experiences. Brad Jerzyk, he's a pastor and a theologian. He says this. He says, "God creates us out of the dust of this world, yet we create a false image of God out of the ashes of our own shame." And I love that, because shame is a lie. It's actually a lie that we've used to cope. Many of us don't deal with emotional health or work on emotional spirituality because we are coping through shame. It's a God that we subconsciously worship. Really, it's a God that we have created and a God that we have learned to fear. And so because of early trauma, you live with the shame, and then that's your coping mechanism, is to go back to feeling that way and being comfortable with feeling with shame, because it's all you've ever known. And it's not an okay place to be in. We really do have to talk about it and address it and give you some tools to work on it. Again, I love that you said this is not like just a light switch where, oh, I'm dealing with it and it's done. No, this is a continual process, sometimes months and years. And it's really important for us, because I know we've said it a lot on this podcast before, but it's really important that if you believe, or if you have a belief that comes from shame, from our experiences, we will play the blame, and blame will be next. And that leads to behavior. And that behavior is not who you are. It's simply what you're doing out of a fear of being rejected because of shame. And shame exists because of a lack of grace. And so ultimately, the simple answer to dealing with shame is finding grace. And unfortunately, you don't find that in a lot of places and with a lot of people. But ultimately, as Christ followers, we should be known for grace. Every church, every person should be a safe haven. I know that's not always the case, but
Right.
this is where shame gets destroyed.
Right. So I love what you just said. Shame exists because of a lack of grace. And a lot of times we feel a lack of grace from other people, but mostly what you mean in that is we have a lack of grace for ourselves and decisions we've made or things we've done, or our behavior, and then we don't give ourselves any grace through the process based on a trauma or an experience that we may have had. And so real quick, let's just break down these two areas of shame so that we can, again, begin to remove it from our life. And so the first area of shame, we have sin consciousness, right? This is where secrets grow. And this is really what we mean earlier when I mentioned the shame of shouldn't have. Like I shouldn't have done something that was contrary to my identity and who God has called me to be fully. And so again, we act out of that shame, which leads to, or from our belief, we act out the shame, blaming others, and then that leads to our behavior. And sometimes our behavior doesn't match up to our full identity and who we are.
Yeah, I love that, because we talk a lot about this, and we get labeled at Hill City Church because we are a sun conscious message, not a sin conscious message. And that's the solution. So what's the solution to sin consciousness? It's sun consciousness. It's an accurate view of the sun in you. Jesus forgave without consent, which I love that. When he was walking around in his Gospels, people were asking for healing, and Jesus would say up front, well, you're forgiven. Notice they didn't ask for forgiveness. They asked for healing. And before Jesus gave them healing, he told them they were forgiven, which means Jesus forgave without your consent, which is a beautiful gospel.
Yeah, that's so amazing. Matter of fact, before you go on, I want to just chime in here because I just got to thinking that, you know, all these different instances, specifically even like the 4 friends that bring their paralyzed friend to Jesus, he looks up and he says, your sins are forgiven. And then he goes on to healing later. But when you think about it, he's removing that shame before he can get to the physical healing.
I love
He's healing mentally and emotionally first. And I say that because in the culture, you know, the first century Jewish culture, whenever someone was born blind or born lame, like this man had been, or got a sickness and became deaf, like all the different like illnesses that we see Jesus healing, they would have these diseases or sicknesses or, you know, physical like incapabilities. And in that culture, people thought they had those because they were a sinner. You know, that they bring the blind man like, and they said, well, is it you that's a sinner, or is it your mom or dad that because they sinned, this is now a consequence from their behavior and action, you're just getting punished. And so imagine the shame, like having a disability or having some of these things that Jesus came to heal physically, how he had to like heal emotionally first. Because in their mind, they walked around, well, did I do something wrong? Did I do something bad? You know, I'm, you know, lame, and so I must have done something, or my parents did something, and now I'm still sitting in the shame of their behavior, and God cursed me. But Jesus steps on the scene right away and says, no, you're forgiven fully. Like, that's not how I see you. So don't see yourself that way. And then he got to the physical healing.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And forgiveness is such a beautiful gospel message, because you weren't forgiven when you said a prayer or believed Jesus. Because if you're forgiven when you say the prayer, that makes your ability to acknowledge your forgiveness more powerful than Jesus' ability to forgive. Forgiveness happened 2,000 years ago. You're forgiven. Awaken to it so that you can actually live without shame, but you are forgiven before you even said your prayer. And that is so important to understand, because I'm not trying to get you to focus on your sin. That just reminds you of the things that you've done and the failures that you've accomplished, so to speak, in your life. I want you to focus on Jesus, because even Hebrews says, fix your eyes on Jesus. We're not supposed to fix our eyes on our sin. Fix our eyes on Jesus, because the more and more you fix your eyes on Jesus, the more and more you'll recognize that he has dealt with your sin and dealt with your shame. So if his love is unconditional, why do you put conditions on it and live in your shame? Like, you are unconditionally loved. You are permanently forgiven, whether you've asked for it. And that is what is so scandalous about the true gospel, is because, as Don Keathley says, who's the president of Global Grace Seminary, he says, the finished work of the cross gives us conclusions, not conditions. And I just think you should marinate in that.
Yeah.
It gives us conclusions.
You know, it's
not
back to saying
conditions.
like the gospel is a declaration, not
Yeah.
an invitation.
It's
These are declarations over you,
beautiful.
conclusions about you that really is beautiful.
Yeah, we did a sermon series for Christmas called Robes of Righteousness a couple years ago. One of my favorite sermon series of all time just talked about how at birth you were wrapped in his robe because righteousness is a gift. It's not based on your performance. And you have always been righteous. And it's God's righteousness, and it doesn't produce pride. It actually produces humility because you didn't do anything to earn it.
Right.
And so that's why we have a Son conscious message, not a sin conscious message, because Son consciousness is how you deal with shame.
Yeah, I love that. I love that solution too. The Son consciousness, to see Jesus in you above anything else,
Yeah.
before behavior in any of it. So that's the first area of shame, this shame of shouldn't have with sin consciousness. The second area of shame is more what the focus of this episode is about, and the shame of should be. And so this is the self-criticism, whether it's judgment about yourself, whether it's from maybe abuse that you've experienced, maybe failures along the way in your life. Maybe there is some pain from childhood trauma or neglect. It could be other people's expectations of you and you didn't live up to that. It could be expectations you had of yourself and you never achieved those things. It could be this idea that you have this stinginess or idea of money based on your upbringing, and it's turned into possibly like a love for money and greed where you have a spirit of lack, but that's produced from shame. And so it's this shame of should be. And so let's talk about the solution to this.
Yeah, self-criticism is huge. This is what we deal with a lot of in the counseling world, one-on-one world. The solution to self-criticism is self-restoration. And this is that process. And I do two B words because counseling is beautiful, but it is brutal. And a lot of people, I tell people that
Accurate.
up front because it's not easy. But it's like that choose your hard meme that we've talked about before on this podcast. Like emotional work never stops. That's why a lot of people don't even start. But it helps you process your painful experiences quicker. So instead of holding on to the shame for a week or a month, you're now holding on to it for like 30 minutes or a day because you've been given the tools to deal with it because you understand self-restoration. And again, this is easier said than done. So we've actually given you 3 ways how to self-restore so that you can overcome your self-criticism. This is how you deal with your shame. This is how you restore yourself. The first one is this. You have to label it. So many times, and this is from my experience with one-on-one, people are afraid or they're full of shame to actually admit what they've done wrong or where they're weak, because they feel like if they admit it, then it becomes real. Well, your brain is incredibly smart and your subconscious has actual power. And if you never consciously admit where there is shame, it will have subconscious power over you. So if you never actually admit it, you'll never be able to deal with it or replace it. So the first thing we do is we just have to sit in that shame. You have to label it. Like, let's come to consciousness of where your areas of shame are running rampant in your life, or where your thought processes are going.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not always easily identifiable.
Yeah, sometimes
you
it's
might
not.
be someone who is, let's say, you're a workaholic, and people are like making you aware of it, and friends are making you aware of it. Well, the shame isn't quite that you love to work and you're at work all the time, but maybe you are that because there's some experience that you've had where you felt shame about maybe not being able to provide for your family, or shame that maybe you didn't do well in school, you weren't quite smart enough, so if I can't outsmart them, I will outwork them, and it's developed into this pattern. Now you're a workaholic. Well, you didn't just become there, you developed this pattern or paradigm because of the shame of maybe something. And so that's what you mean. This process of labeling it isn't just like you're going to, I feel a certain way all of a sudden. It might be based on behavior again, right? We talked about that belief to shame, to blame, to behavior. And it might be in that process. And then we have to be able to dive in really to be able to label it based on some of these behaviors that we have.
I'm glad you said that because it's really easy to label some shameful experiences because they're the obvious.
Right.
But yeah, all of us deal with this. And I'm glad you used workaholic as an example because you might be living in shame on something that is good. Like working is good. Workaholic is not good. You have to figure out, and that's what sometimes getting a safe person in your life to help you process some of these things, because they might be able to help you become aware of something that you might be blind to. So you first have to label it. The second thing you have to do is you have to anchor yourself. And I mean this literally and figuratively. And by figuratively, I mean spiritually. So literally and spiritually. Spiritually, I mean Hebrews 6, again, the author of Hebrews 6:19 says that God is an anchor to your soul. And I love that because I've used this illustration. I think I stole it from like Judah Smith years ago, where we oftentimes want Jesus to come in with a helicopter and rescue us from our situation. Like, I want Jesus to be my rescuer.
Right.
But Jesus is an anchor. And sometimes he anchors you within that storm because one, he's with you through it all. And oftentimes the storms are not, actually, none of the times. I don't believe that God sends storms like that, because Jesus cannot rebuke what God sends, because then they're a house that's divided. So if you think that God's bringing the storm to teach you a lesson, you've misunderstood the heart of the Father, because Jesus rebukes those storms. However, storms do come in your life. Again, they're not from the Father. This is just life, but he's with you through it. And so anchoring yourself to knowing, okay, I've got Christ with me, and regardless of what I'm going through, and I can learn a lesson through this, is a different shift in perspective. But I also mean like literally. So in the counseling world, put your feet on the ground and feel your feet. Come to your senses. Like, eternal life is the ever-present now. Learn that from Paul Young. I use it all the time now. Come to this moment, be present, be safe. You're safe, okay? Feel your feet on the ground. Now let's look around. If you're out in nature or you're in your house, like, start noticing things. Notice the smells. Notice the sights. Hear. What do you hear? And bringing people to the conscious awareness of the present is so important to dealing with shame. You might think it's just silly. I'm telling you, this stuff works. And sometimes in our one-on-one counselings, we go certain places figuratively in their mind where they have spiritual or literal experiences. And that's a lot of fun too. But you got to think about it like this. God shows up in the scriptures 4 times. He gets in the dirt. And when I preached this, I said 3 times, and someone came up and corrected me, and they were actually right. And I was like, that is awesome. 1, it's to create Adam. This is the picture of the joy of life. Mm-hmm. 2, it's to bury Moses, which is a very interesting passage of scripture in the Torah. That's the pain of death. 3, it's to defend the woman caught in adultery. And that's what? That's to embrace the woman and cover her shame. The 4th one, it's to create mud, where he restores the guy's sight, spits in the dirt, and rubs it on his eyes. It's a picture of restoration. So all 4 times where God gets in the dirt, literally, it's to bring the joy of life. It's to deal with the pain of death. It's to embrace or cover shame, and it's to bring restoration, which in my opinion is what Christians should be there. They should be the people that embrace and cover shame and bring restoration to all people.
Basically you're saying God got in the dirt, so we need to as well.
Yeah, get in the dirt. So you label it, you anchor yourself, literally, spiritually. And the 3rd one, and this is so important, is connect. You were designed for connection. You are supposed to connect with other real human beings, because shame flourishes in isolation. And again, we do this in the counseling session, and this is why it's different for every single person. But hurt, in my opinion, must be heard before it can be healed. And I know Dr. Caroline Leaf, she says it this way: you cannot shame yourself into change. You can only love yourself into healing. I love that process. But connection is so important. I know we've brought up the statistic before. We have worked with people in AA, and they say that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety.
Right, it's connection.
It's connection. And don't underestimate connection. Again, in this specific area, you got to find safe people. And unfortunately, that's not as easy said than done, but you have to connect with other people, let them in. And usually when you're open with a safe person, you'll find out that they start to get comfortable and open up, and you find out that there are a lot more people who are thinking and dealing with a lot of the same things you are. And it's time we start bringing shame to our shame so it no longer has its power. So you label it, you anchor yourself, and you connect. And again, it's simple, but it's difficult, and it's a process. It's important for you to begin that process.
Right. And so we would encourage you to find someone to go through this journey with you, and maybe share this episode with them. Say, hey, I want to start working on this shame of should be. I have a lot of things that I felt failure in, that I've allowed shame to attach to my life. And so in this process of labeling it, anchoring myself, and connecting, like, I need someone. I need you to walk through this journey with me. And we encourage you to do that. Find that safe person and go through this. And, for more even insight into this, I really want to encourage you to go even read the story about the prodigal son. specifically even talking about this idea of the older brother syndrome. Now, we did a whole episode on this, episode 145. You can go back and listen to this. And in both instances, the prodigal and the older brother, they both had seasons where they experienced shame for some reason. And we want to think about us being safe people, where other people that come to us, we don't just judge them by their shame. And so we talk about on this episode, like, can you imagine if the younger brother who was feeling the shame met with the older brother before the dad got to him? And we painted this picture as like, that's what a lot of people experience from people that are supposed to be following Jesus and loving and helping remove shame. But instead, can you imagine those hurtful things that would have been said or done if he would have got to the older brother first? And so in this story, I think there's a lot of encouragement. Go back, listen to the episode, but read the story for yourself. And I think as we are people that embrace people like the father did to that prodigal son, we help in the process of this idea of removing this shame, the shame of shouldn't have or the shame of should be.
Yeah, because how you represent the Father matters, and it will impact other people's life. I like how even Pastor Derek this past week at Hill City Church, he preached on the mustard seed, and he talked about when you think about a tree at full grown, it gives three things. It gives shade, it gives fruit, and it gives oxygen. And those should be the three things that are the staples in the Christian's life. Is people should come to your tree, your life, and find shade, the cover of shame.
Yeah.
They should find fruit, which kindness, love, joy, all the fruits of the Spirit. And then they should find oxygen, because you are a restoring person who breathes life into their dead season.
So good.
So good. And so I know that there's so many people listening, and we're going to close this episode real quick. All of us deal with shame at different levels. If you haven't yet began the process of dealing with your shame, I invite you to do that process. Find somebody who's safe that can help you with it. But I just want to prophetically speak Isaiah 61:7 over you. Now, I know I'm taking it out of context, and that's okay, because I'm telling you that I'm taking it out of context. But I'm going to release it over you, because this was a prophetic word that Isaiah gave to the people of Israel. But I'm going to prophetically declare it over your life in the Lord today. And it says this: instead of your shame, you shall have double honor. And so if you're listening to this right now as we close this episode, we know you've got a lot of shame. Some stuff might be coming to the surface. That's okay. You are okay. And it's okay to not be okay. I think we did a whole episode on that. Yep. But I want to speak, as you begin to deal with your shame, you will receive double honor.
Yeah. And I want to say you're worthy of double honor, regardless of the shame that you might be feeling. So if this episode has blessed you, encouraged you, challenged you, we would really appreciate it if you would share it with someone, bring it up in conversation, have them listen to it, and then you develop a conversation and have somebody join you in this process of removing shame from your life. And maybe you could be a help in other people's journey, removing shame for theirs. And that's why we do this podcast, to help you and give you resources to start that journey. So start the journey. And with that, just know, in this journey, you're loved, and there's nothing you can do about it.